For centuries, humans have wondered, who am I really? Modern science joined that quest, aiming to trace the true me inside the folds of the human brain. The expectation, a core, a controller, a definable place where the sense of I lives. But what they found was startling. Not a self, but a system. Not a controller, but coordination. Rather than locating a central operator behind the scenes, researchers uncovered a vast decentralized network, intricate, self-organizing, and profoundly mysterious. Thoughts, emotions, intentions, all rising and falling within neural circuits, like waves on the surface of a deep, invisible ocean. Imagine entering a cockpit with no pilot, yet the plane flies with astonishing precision. That's your brain. In this view, the self is not an object. It's an appearance, a sensation born from billions of neurons interacting in patterns too complex to trace, too fluid to pin down. There is no inner executive, no inner narrator issuing commands, just processes, just awareness, observing. And yet, something persists, an undeniable sense of being, a quiet knowing that you are here, present, awake, experiencing. Where does that come from? If the brain is only circuitry, then what is it that's aware of the brain? In this video, we'll explore that question in depth. We'll look beyond neurons and narratives, beyond thought itself, to discover the silent field of awareness in which all of this unfolds. It's not just an explanation, it's an invitation to directly experience what remains when the voice in your head goes quiet. Before we continue, pause for a moment. Have you ever caught yourself observing your own thoughts, as if from a distance? Leave a comment sharing what that moment felt like for you. Was it peaceful, strange, unsettling? Your insight might resonate more than you realize. Consciousness isn't created by the brain. It's not a byproduct of neurons firing or chemicals reacting. It is the ever-present field in which all experience unfolds. Thoughts, sensations, memories, and perceptions. The brain, in this view, doesn't produce awareness. It simply tunes into it, like a radio picking up frequencies from a deeper source. This idea may sound radical, but to those who explore awareness directly, it feels self-evident. And yet this is where many get caught, especially during meditation. Even experienced practitioners can confuse thinking about awareness with being awareness. They sit in silence, but their minds are busy narrating. Am I doing this right? Is this stillness? Have I let go yet? This subtle voice, the internal narrator, inserts itself even into the most sincere attempts at presence. And mistaking this voice for awareness itself is perhaps the most common trap on the inner path. To truly understand awareness, we must first understand what it is not. It is not the voice in your head, no matter how calm, wise, or gentle that voice may seem. That voice is part of the mind. It functions in familiar patterns, and if we slow down enough, we can begin to see these patterns clearly. First, there's storytelling mode. This is the part of your mind that weaves life into a narrative, connecting unrelated events to give them personal meaning. A delayed message becomes rejection. A casual glance becomes judgment. This mode builds your identity one storyline at a time. It's endlessly creative, but also endlessly deceptive. It wants coherence, not truth. And in doing so, it builds a self-image out of fragile assumptions. Next is judgment mode, the internal critic. It constantly compares you to others, evaluates your performance, and finds you lacking. You're not doing enough. You should have known better. It measures everything against invisible, shifting standards. And here's the trick. It doesn't only criticize, sometimes it praises you. But praise and blame are two sides of the same coin. The mind maintaining control through evaluation. You are still being managed, still being measured, still being shaped. Then there's cheerleader mode, the positive spin, the motivational voice. You're doing great. This will pass. Keep going, you've got this. This may sound helpful, and it often is, but it's still the same mechanism. The mind, trying to improve your experience by talking about it, trying to fix, soothe, push, or reframe, always from the outside. What makes all of this so deceptive is how easily the narrator mimics awareness. It can imitate calm, it can echo spiritual language, it can even say, let go, while secretly holding on to control. It whispers things like, be here now, observe the breath, stay centered, but it is still talking about being present, instead of simply being present. True awareness doesn't use words. It doesn't comment. It doesn't analyze. It simply watches. It sees the storyteller crafting meaning. It sees the critic judging. It sees the cheerleader trying to fix. And it does nothing. Not out of apathy, but because it already knows none of it is ultimately real. None of it defines you. It passes, like wind through an open window. This pure awareness is not distant. It's not blank. It is alive with presence, but absolutely silent. Not the silence of a machine that's powered down, but the silence of deep stillness, like the air in a concert hall just before the music begins. It is not affected by thought, emotion, or sensation. All of those come and go, but awareness remains, unshaken, undivided, uninterested in improvement. And this can feel unsettling at first. We are so used to managing experience, fixing it, narrating it. But awareness doesn't do any of that. It holds all things: joy, pain, confusion, clarity, without resistance. Like the sky accepts the weather, your thoughts are clouds, your emotions are clouds, your memories, your hopes, your inner voice, all clouds. They shift and move and change. But the sky remains. Awareness is the sky. And once you begin to rest in that sky, not as an idea, but as a living experience, something quiet awakens. You realize, I am not the voice. I am the one who hears it. Whether your thoughts are peaceful or chaotic, whether the voice in your head is whispering criticism or encouragement, the awareness behind it all remains unchanged. Still, open, silent. And when you begin to rest in that awareness, not just briefly, but deeply, again and again, something quietly extraordinary begins to unfold. You begin to notice a shift, subtle at first, then undeniable. A realization emerges not from thinking, but from direct experience, that this presence, this awareness, doesn't feel like yours. It doesn't feel personal. It doesn't belong to your name, your story, or even your body. In fact, the longer you stay present as this silent witness, the more clearly you begin to sense this same awareness is not only in you, it's in everyone. Not similar, not connected like two computers on a network, but literally the same field of consciousness, perceiving through different lenses, different nervous systems, different lives, yet never divided. The awareness witnessing your thoughts right now is the exact same awareness watching your friend laugh. The same awareness sitting quietly inside a monk during morning meditation in a Himalayan cave. The same awareness behind the eyes of a stranger sipping coffee in a crowded Berlin train station. The same awareness watching clouds roll over a silent desert somewhere you've never been. What's different between you and them is not consciousness itself, it's the content flowing through it. Different emotions, different beliefs, different memories and stories. But the field in which all of that arises, identical, universal, undivided. And this isn't just a beautiful idea. It's not poetic mysticism. It's what people throughout history, across cultures and continents, have discovered in their quietest moments. They called it many names. The self, the Tao, the Atman, the one mind, the God within. But they were all pointing to the same thing. A consciousness that doesn't begin or end at the boundaries of your skin. It doesn't belong to you. It isn't produced by your brain. Your body and mind are simply expressions moving through it, like waves forming on the surface of a vast and borderless ocean. When this truth is seen, not just intellectually but felt, something profound shifts in how you relate to yourself and to others. You begin to see that the boundary between me and you was never fixed. It was a habit of perception. A mental shortcut, a useful illusion, but still, an illusion. And suddenly even the most mundane encounters become sacred. Looking into someone's eyes, you begin to sense, not imagine, not pretend, but know that the same awareness behind your gaze is looking back at you. It's as if consciousness is playing a game with itself, appearing as separate people, separate lives, separate struggles, while secretly remaining one. This is why mystics and sages across time have said things like, there is only one, I am that. The self in me is the same in all beings, not out of metaphor, but from direct recognition. When you stop identifying with the mental narration, the inner history, the labels, the past and future, what remains is pure, silent, boundless knowing. And when you really rest there, you realize There was never more than one awareness, only different expressions of the same vast intelligence. Even right now, as you read these words, if you drop into that silence between thoughts, the gap between the words, you can sense it, not conceptually, but directly. The awareness reading these words is the same awareness that wrote them, not similar, the same. And that awareness is also what watched over every moment in human history. It was there before language, before thought, before the idea of you or me ever appeared. It's here now, in this very breath, and it's not going anywhere. Once this becomes more than a theory, your entire relationship with life begins to shift. You stop living from the narrow frame of personal identity. You begin to live from a wider truth, that all beings are simply reflections of the same light, shaped by different conditions, but illuminated by the same source. You may still have preferences, stories, opinions, but they no longer define you. They're just waves rising and falling in the ocean of what you really are. And in that space, compassion becomes effortless, separation dissolves, and the mystery of life no longer feels like something out there. It feels like home. Your internal narrator runs incredibly deep. It didn't arrive out of nowhere. It wasn't randomly assigned. It began long before you were aware of it. In infancy, when you first started forming the earliest distinctions between self and other, between what's me and what's not, this split, subtle but profound, laid the foundation for all future mental conditioning. And it's from this invisible blueprint that your internal voice was shaped. As you grow older, layer upon layer of beliefs start accumulating. Beliefs about your worth, about what you're allowed to feel, about what success means, about how love is earned or denied. These beliefs don't stay abstract. They slowly crystallize into the lens through which you interpret the entire world. And your internal narrator speaks through that lens every single day. What most people don't realize is that this narrator, this internal voice, isn't you. It's a composite. A voice stitched together from your upbringing, your culture, your traumas, your triumphs. It is the voice of your conditioning. Cultural influence plays a massive role. If you were raised in a society that values competition and individual achievement, your narrator likely sounds like a taskmaster. It compares you to others, pushes you harder, demands that you perform, succeed, improve. If instead you were raised in a culture that prioritizes harmony and collective identity, your narrator may be constantly measuring how well you conform, how accepted you are, how smoothly you blend in. In both cases, the voice isn't true, it's trained. These cultural programs run so deep, they often go unnoticed. They're not questioned because they don't feel like conditioning. They feel like reality. But they aren't reality. They're inherited filters, and they distort what you see, feel, and believe is possible. Then there's family conditioning, perhaps even more influential. The emotional tone of your household becomes internalized. If your caregivers were anxious, you likely developed an internal narrator that scans for danger. If they were critical, your narrator may be harsh and punishing. Even well-meaning parents who praise conditionally or protect excessively can create a narrator that is obsessed with approval and performance. And so, without realizing it, your mind becomes a mirror, reflecting back the emotional habits of those who raised you. Spiritual and religious conditioning also imprints itself. If you were raised with the belief that you are inherently flawed, your narrator may become morally self-judging, hyper-aware of mistakes, saturated in guilt. If instead you were taught that you are inherently divine, the narrator may adopt a spiritual ego, subtle but dangerous, quietly judging others for not being as conscious or awake as you think you are. All of this shapes your internal dialogue, the stories you tell about yourself, the roles you believe you're playing, the limits you think are real. Now, this doesn't mean the internal narrator is always harmful. With intentional effort, it can become more compassionate, more gentle. Practices like gratitude journaling, loving kindness meditation, or positive affirmations can soften its tone. They can teach your internal voice new language, encouragement instead of critique, curiosity instead of shame. But here's the crucial insight. Even a kind internal narrator is still a narrator. Even a wise-sounding mind is still the mind. And no matter how refined or evolved it becomes, it remains a product of conditioning. A voice attempting to manage life by narrating it. If you truly want to access pure awareness, you must look elsewhere entirely, not within the voice, but beneath it. Not in the commentary, but in the stillness that hears the commentary. Not in your story, but in the open space in which the story appears. Pure awareness exists in a dimension completely untouched by your past. It's not interested in your reputation. It doesn't care whether you've succeeded or failed. It's not shaped by memory or moved by anxiety. It is only here, right now, and it has always been. This is why the present moment is so sacred. It's not just a spiritual idea. It's the only place where reality is actually happening. Everything else, past or future, is thought. Memory is thought. Imagination is thought. Both arise in the now. Pure awareness is the essence of now. It doesn't anticipate. It doesn't regret. It doesn't comment. It simply is. While the internal narrator analyzes your actions, pure awareness just watches. While the mind asks if you're doing enough, awareness doesn't even pose the question. It doesn't push or pull. It doesn't try to improve. And yet, it is the source of all intelligence, all insight, all creativity, and all peace. In this moment, all of your life, past and future, is contained. Every choice you've ever made, every person you've ever loved or lost, every possibility that could unfold, it's all here, held silently in awareness. This is what the Bhagavad Gita refers to when it describes you as the eternal witness. This is what teachers like Eckhart Tolle mean when they say you are not your thoughts, you are the space in which thought appears. But the conditioned mind doesn't like this. It resists. Because if you are not your thoughts, your history, your personality, then what are you? This question threatens the foundation of the self-image the mind has spent decades building. So resistance arises, sometimes subtle, sometimes intense. It will distract you. It will create profound spiritual insights that seem meaningful, but actually keep you trapped in mental activity. It will build an identity around awakening itself, a new story, more refined, but still a story. And yet, none of that needs to be fought. You don't have to battle the conditioned mind. You don't need to silence the narrator. You don't even need to fix anything. You simply need to see it, recognize it, and rest as the awareness that watches it all, untouched, unchanging, free. And yet, as presence deepens and the noise of mental commentary begins to fade, many encounter something unexpected, a subtle discomfort, a resistance that arises not from the world, but from within. It isn't loud. It doesn't shout or panic. It's more like a shadow that quietly passes through your experience. A vague sense that something is missing. A fear that if you continue this inward turning, this settling into pure awareness, you may arrive at nothing. This is the fear of mental emptiness. You see, we've been conditioned to equate activity with meaning, to believe that a mind constantly engaged is a sign of intelligence, of aliveness, of value. Silence, on the other hand, is often misinterpreted, not as clarity, but as a void. And the void, to the untrained mind, feels threatening. When thoughts begin to fall away, the mind senses its loss of control. It no longer drives the story. It no longer frames the narrative. And so it begins to whisper, if I stop thinking, do I still exist? If there's no problem to solve, what do I do with myself? If there's only stillness, am I disappearing? But this fear arises not because there's truly nothing there. It arises because you are encountering space without content, and your identity has been built almost entirely out of content. Thoughts, emotions, memories, opinions, they've formed the scaffolding of who you believed yourself to be. And now, in the quiet of awareness, that scaffolding isn't needed. So naturally, the conditioned mind recoils. It tries to reassert itself by generating new thoughts, by creating mental distractions, by telling you this stillness is dangerous, lifeless, even boring. It will say anything to pull you back into the familiar territory of form, sensation, and narrative. But here's the deeper truth. Mental emptiness is not absence. It is openness. It is the spaciousness where wisdom emerges. It is the inner sky, vast, bright, and untouched, that makes room for genuine insight. And in that space, what you discover isn't a void, it's freedom. Freedom from being defined by every thought. Freedom from compulsively analyzing your every move. Freedom from the heavy burden of needing to become something other than what you already are. This space, which first feels like emptiness, reveals itself as presence in its purest form. And once you've tasted it, even for a moment, you begin to see, you are not losing yourself in the silence. You are meeting yourself for the first time. You are not vanishing. You are becoming transparent to the truth of your being. You are not drifting into some meaningless abyss. You are arriving home, finally, in the stillness that's been patiently waiting behind every distraction. You are not vanishing. You are becoming transparent to the truth of your being. You are not drifting into some meaningless abyss. You are arriving home, finally, in the stillness that's been patiently waiting behind every distraction. But let's acknowledge it honestly, this transition can be unsettling, especially at the beginning. The mind, stripped of its constant projects, loses its favorite grip, the sense of doing. And when there's nothing left to do, nowhere to go, nothing to fix, what remains? Just being. And for a mind addicted to stimulation, even being can feel like boredom. But boredom is not emptiness. It's the detox symptoms of the overstimulated self. The modern world has trained us to associate value with movement, productivity, and stimulation. So when you first rest in pure awareness, it may feel like you're missing something. You may feel unimportant, invisible, or even anxious. Not because awareness lacks value, but because value has always been defined by how busy, useful, or on you are. Here's the truth. Pure awareness doesn't perform. It doesn't seek approval. It doesn't argue or defend. It simply is. Radiant, still, quiet. And in that quiet, it reflects back to you the real reason for your discomfort. Not that awareness is empty, but that the identity you've built around thinking can't survive without noise. This fear of emptiness is at its core the fear of losing the self you were taught to protect. The persona, the mental mask, the me that needs constant maintenance, validation, narration. Without the usual inner chatter, it starts to feel like that me is dissolving, and in many ways it is. But what replaces it is not nothingness. What remains is a deeper, more authentic presence. One that doesn't need a story to feel whole. One that doesn't need attention to feel real. One that simply rests in itself. This is why so many mystics, sages, and contemplatives throughout history have spoken of emptiness not as a void, but as fullness. A fullness not of objects, ideas, or activity, but of presence. A presence so complete that it needs nothing to complete it. The fear of mental emptiness arises only when you resist that presence. When you try to impose form onto formlessness. When you expect meaning to come from noise, rather than recognizing it in silence. True peace comes when you stop trying to fill the stillness and allow yourself to become the stillness. Because in that stillness, there is no demand, no lack, no chase, only being. And here's the most paradoxical truth. The more deeply you allow this emptiness, the more alive everything becomes. Suddenly, the most ordinary things shimmer with a subtle light. The way wind moves through trees, the pause between your breaths, the silence after a sentence ends. These moments are no longer in the background, they are the experience. And you begin to see, the richness of life was never in the complexity. It was always hidden in the simplicity. In the space you once feared, you now find your freedom. In the quiet you once resisted, you now feel most yourself. Mental emptiness is not the absence of life. It is the clearing in which life reveals itself. Not through effort, but through presence. Not through clinging, but through letting go. You do not need to fear this space. You came from it. You return to it in every moment of surrender, and it welcomes you, endlessly, silently, without judgment. So next time you feel that eerie quiet creeping in, that pause between thoughts, that silence beneath the surface, don't fill it, don't label it, just stay, breathe, and allow yourself to fall open into it. There in that soft and subtle spaciousness, you may just discover what no thought has ever been able to give you, a peace that needs no reason. What's particularly fascinating is that this shift from having to being doesn't add anything to you. It doesn't grant you new qualities, new ideas, or new powers. Instead, it removes everything that's false. It strips away what you're not, the stories, roles, thoughts, beliefs, and boundaries you unconsciously clung to, until all that remains is what you've always been. Not a person observing life from the outside, but life itself aware of itself from the inside. The fear of emptiness begins to dissolve here, because you realize there was never emptiness in the way your mind imagined it. Some cold, black void, devoid of meaning or structure. What you were calling emptiness was actually boundless freedom, misunderstood by a conditioned mind addicted to form and control. And now, in this recognition, the qualities of this so-called void reveal themselves: stillness, but not stagnation; silence, but not absence; spaciousness, but full of possibility. This is where the sacred finally becomes obvious, not in mystical visions, nor in ancient scriptures, but in the immediacy of your own experience, in the way your breath moves through your body, in the way the world sounds when you're not naming it, in the warm weight of your hands folded in your lap. The sacred is not somewhere else. It is here, in the unspoken intimacy between awareness and what it perceives. And now that you're no longer resisting this space, this groundless ground, it begins to reveal its nature to you more and more. You are not observing awareness from the outside, you are awareness observing itself. This recognition may come in waves, sometimes clear and radiant, other times clouded or distant, but each time you return to it, the return becomes more natural, less effortful. You stop seeking it as a destination. Instead, you begin to abide in it as your natural condition. And here's where something miraculous begins to unfold. From this resting as awareness, you begin to recognize your role in creation, not as a character in the story, but as the field in which the story arises. Not a passive witness watching the universe from the sidelines, but the very canvas upon which existence paints itself. Every moment of your life, every sensation, thought, emotion, is not just happening to you, it is happening through you. You are not separate from the creative force of reality. You are that force, expressing itself in a form, through a perspective for a while. This doesn't mean you control reality with your thoughts. It means that your very being is woven into the fabric of creation itself. You are the wave and the ocean, the flame and the fire, the voice and the silence behind the voice. From this recognition, action becomes clearer, not driven by anxiety or insecurity, but flowing naturally, like water downhill, not for validation, not for control, but as an effortless expression of the stillness within. This is the quiet revolution at the heart of spiritual realization. The understanding that what you are is not a fragment, not a thinker, not a name, but the infinite appearing as the finite, the timeless taking a brief shape in time, the ungraspable experiencing itself through you. And when this becomes your lived reality, not just an idea or insight, but the atmosphere you dwell in, life stops being a series of problems to solve. It becomes a mystery to be lived, fully, consciously, lovingly. So let yourself fall into that space. Let the walls collapse. Let the story go quiet. You are not the character. You are not the thoughts. You are not the voice that explains everything. You are the field in which all of it arises, and into which silently and peacefully it all returns. This recognition, that you are both the witness and the witnessed, gives rise to a paradox so subtle, so profound, that mystics across cultures and centuries have circled around it with poetry, silence, and metaphor. You are the one watching, and at the very same time, you are what is being watched. This isn't wordplay, it's not an abstract philosophy. It's a living, breathing, direct experience that reveals itself only when the mind becomes quiet enough to stop dividing the world. In ordinary perception, we feel split. Here is the subject, me, observing the object, that. I am in here, the world is out there, but this division is learned, not real. It's a habit of thought, not a truth of being. When you begin to rest in pure awareness, free of labels, free of filters, that imagined boundary dissolves, and what you discover is not an empty space, but a field. A single, unified, luminous field in which everything arises, thoughts, sensations, forms, people, and from which nothing is truly separate. The observer and the observed are not two. They are the same field of consciousness, folding in on itself, looking at itself, experiencing itself through the appearance of division. This is the end of inner conflict, because there is no longer an internal voice resisting the moment, no self-image to protect, no story to uphold. There is just what is whole, complete, self-luminous. You don't become this field. You realize you've always been this field, not a fragment within it, not a passenger passing through it, but the very space in which it all unfolds. The idea of separation between self and other, subject and object, thought and thinker, collapses, and what rushes in to fill the space where that illusion once stood is something wordless but unmistakably real: unity. And in unity, there is no need for defense, no identity to guard, no future to control. You don't need to become anything, because there's nothing missing. You don't need to fix anything, because nothing is broken. You don't need to reach enlightenment, because what you are is already light. The search ends not with a destination, but with a return to what you never left, but only forgot. Yes, the journey was long. Yes, the seeking was sincere. Yes, the practices mattered. But now you see, it wasn't about becoming, it was about remembering. You are the one who was seeking, and you are what was being sought. This is the cosmic joke, and the sacred truth. The observer has always been the observed. The looker has always been the seen. The knower has always been the known. And once you realize this, not in your head, but in the marrow of your being, your entire relationship with life changes. It softens, it relaxes. You no longer grip experience so tightly. You let it flow through you, because you are the flow. This realization doesn't mean you stop acting or speaking or making choices. It means that your actions now arise from presence, not from the frantic need to complete some imagined version of yourself. You move through life not as someone trying to become, but as being itself, expressing, shifting, dancing through form. This union of observer and observed also reveals something startling. Awareness doesn't just perceive reality, it shapes it. Not in the way fantasy teaches, where you wish and things change, but in the subtle, intimate way that your attention, your presence, your conscious witnessing changes the nature of what's being witnessed. This is what quantum physicists have called the observer effect, that at the most fundamental level, particles do not exist in fixed states until they are observed. It's not that consciousness is passively watching a pre-written script, it is co-writing it, moment by moment. So what you bring your awareness to begins to shift. What you accept without resistance begins to transform, not because you force it, but because you meet it with the one thing that has the power to truly heal: undivided presence. You are not a separate subject, trapped in a body, looking out at a world of otherness. You are the open field in which subject and object, self and other, inner and outer, all arise and fall like waves on a single sea. And the more you rest in that knowing, the more clearly you see. You've never been apart from anything. You've always been the whole thing, watching itself from infinite angles.